Hey everybody, my name is Mark, and today I would like to talk to you about my Gecko Customs Sikorae. Alright, so this is the Gecko Customs Sikorae version 1. And this is actually my second video on this knife. The first one, I was mistakenly calling it a version 2. And so I've had to delete those videos, and I'm going to explain all that. But we're going to kind of cover this knife, not in as great a detail as I did in the first video, because that involved taking it apart and cleaning it. It was really pretty dirty inside, lubricating it, and then I spent some time tuning it. And so now this knife is completely done and finished and smooth as silk. So you're not going to be able to see any of that because I'm not going to subject everyone to another hour-long video. But basically we're going to cover the basics, and then I'm going to tell you the story about this knife and kind of what happened. So this is a 3-inch Magna Cut blade, and it is full titanium. This is toxic camo, carbon fiber inlays on the scales, and I pretty much like everything about this knife. And it surprises me because this is a 3-inch blade. And so I've had rules about 3-inch blades. I don't really, that's just, I've always felt that that's a little too short. I like about a 3.4, 3.5 inch blade, something like that. But after I got this knife, and there was one other before this, and I think it mainly has to do with the finger choil. So when you grip this knife, you automatically just kind of gravitate to that finger choil. And if you kind of trigger pull it up here, even with no jimping on the blade spine, it doesn't really matter because this really kind of melts into your hand and it feels fantastic. I love the way this knife feels. And I don't even notice that this is kind of a shorter blade. It's almost like a stitch, right? So the Microtech stitch has a 3-inch blade, but it's got a really huge finger choil. It also has kind of a little poon shape that you kind of use as a thumb rest up here on top. It does have jimping on the top, and so you grip this little 3-inch blade that it has. It's a really wide, kind of, almost a triangle shaped blade. And it's got a full-size handle, so it's a little weird, but the finger choil takes up so much room that it leaves like a 3-inch cutting edge. And so it really feels good to, kind of choke up on. And I never liked those until I actually handled one. And then I was, I kind of got what everyone was talking about. This is almost the same. So this big finger choil here just makes this knife feel fantastic in my hand. And so I really like it. That's one of the reasons that, I traded for it. I'm going to go ahead and do some size comparisons, and then we'll kind of get into the story. So as I've said, this is a 3-inch blade. It's almost exactly 3 inches. I think it's 3.04 or something like that. And so I'll compare it to a Monterey Bay Rosalinda, which is going to be a little bit bigger. And we'll compare it to a Brian Brown Jaeger M. This is a V3. And this is almost exactly the same size. I love this knife. I love it because of the flipping action especially. This is one of my favorite knives to like fidget with. But this one's like a really close second. And it's got almost exactly the same blade size. So that should tell you something. And then we're going to do a Reich Cybertrix, which it's kind of hard because it's a hidden pivot. But you can see it's a little bit smaller than the Cybertrix. And the story about this knife is when I first saw this on Blade Binge, the listing called this a V2. It had a copy of the certificate of authenticity, but I'd never dealt with Gecko Customs before, and so I didn't know, kind of what those look like. It had a born on date of 2024, and it did say Magna Cut. The model designator did say Sikorae, and that's kind of all I knew. And the pricing was, about right. I kind of compared it quickly to pricing on, other Sikoraes, and it seemed to fall in line with those. And so I did a couple of videos on them, and there was a commenter that kind of chimed in, and he was like, hey, that's a cool knife or whatever, but it is a V1, just so you know. So I spent probably the next 3 hours after that trying to research and, verify his claim. And it wasn't until I went back to that commenter's own video where he was showing a V2. Some of the changes that Gecko Customs made between the V1 and the V2 are unbelievably subtle changes. But one of the changes they made that stood out the most, and it's one that not a lot of people talk about, and I couldn't really find a bunch of stuff online about it, is they actually eased the titanium scale here to provide more access to the lock bar. So right about here, this angle right here is the same, and it gets to right about here, and then it swoops down just a little bit more. And it's almost, it's kind of hard to see, but it's one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So it gets right here, and it goes down a little bit, and then it continues up and follows the same curve again. So it's a really subtle thing, but in doing that, they also expose a little more blade under the blade window that you can see when the blade is closed like this. So because that's eased, you would see a little more blade. What everyone talks about is like an elongated thumb hole in the V2 compared to the V1. That may be true. If it is, it's, pretty subtle. And I think most of the difference is just visible because they changed the titanium scale here. But it could be that I think this dimension probably across here on the blade window may be close to being the same on the V2. And this height-wise could be a little different. They could have made this shorter. And so it ends up making it looking, like it's elongated or whatever. But I think most of it is just a visual kind of a trick, because they've got this kind of hollowed out a little bit. And even that is hard to see. But like I said, once you see it, it's like, okay, that's what the deal is. So it ended up being, I was proven wrong, and I appreciate that guy. He actually has a YouTube channel, and it's called, let's see, what is that called? TBD_EDC. So Tango Bravo Delta _EDC. And he's a super nice guy. His channel is even newer than mine. And so anyone that sees this should go over there and subscribe and, comment on one of his videos. But he pointed out in a really nice, kind of polite way that, hey, I like that knife too, but that is a V1 that you've got. And so I really appreciate that guy. And it kind of, made me clean up a bunch of stuff. I had to delete those other videos, but I could not stand the thought of having something with my name attached to it that was out on the internet, creating misinformation or just wrong information. And so I've deleted those videos, and now I'm redoing this one. But this is definitely a V1, and I can kind of see where, because this is a late V1. This was, the born on date was 2024. So the V1 for Gecko Customs was released sometime in 2023. So they ran the V1 for about 1.5 years, maybe almost 2 years. And then they just kind of released the V2, and it wasn't like a solid like discontinuation of the V1. They just kind of phased them out and stopped producing them as they slid into the V2. And that happened late 24 and early 25. So this was right on the cusp. That's why this one has a MagnaCut blade. Those are pretty rare in a V1, and it's only the really late production. And when they started doing things like this, that's when they made that subtle change to the scale and kind of labeled it a V2 and started producing those. Also, in the original listing, this was listed as a kelp bed camo inlays, and the kelp bed was definitely a V2 option. This is a toxic camo, or the toxic green, I guess, or whatever. And so I found out that that was available on a V2, but only for a little while. And then they changed it out for a bunch of different, inlay colors and patterns and all that stuff. So it's right in the middle, but the undeniable sign that this is a V1 is that titanium. This is obviously a flowing curve that it doesn't stop and it just kind of goes. And if it was a V2, you would see this would come right about here and then kind of swoop down just a little bit more. So that's kind of the story on the knife. When I got this knife, it was really pretty dirty. And so that first video I made was an hour long. I took down the knife, I did all the things, size comparison and talked about specs and everything else. Then I took the knife down and I spent quite a bit of time cleaning it. There was some, hard, kind of crusty debris up in the pivot area and under the bearings and the washers and stuff like that. So it was pretty dirty. And the action when I first got it, it worked. I mean, you could get it to open and close, but it wasn't smooth and anything like, I would have wanted, or, especially after I finished tuning something. So I took a lot of time cleaning it and then I reassembled it, new lubrication with the method that I use and, kind of trust. And then I started tuning it and I got it tuned basically to the point it is now. So this is a really smooth action now. And I'm super happy with this knife. And I have no problem at all with the guy that sold it to me. He said it was a mistake. It was certainly my fault for being uninformed. But I don't have any hard feelings. I like this knife a lot, and I don't feel at all like I got, ripped off or anything like that. I do feel kind of stupid for, not even being able to recognize the difference between a V1 and a V2. But I will say those are pretty subtle changes. And unless you're, really up on your, Gecko Customs knives and all that, and you were just a consumer that saw it and didn't know it all like I was, you would have probably been fooled too. So, and not that anyone was trying to purposely fool me. It was just, again, this was me. I just wasn't, aware of what was going on. But anyway, I couldn't stand the thought of those videos being out there, so I deleted those. And this is kind of my cleanup video on the, Sikorae V1. And I still really like this knife. If anybody out there, they're kind of hard to come by. You don't find them a lot. I looked on eBay. There's not a lot of V1s floating around out there. And in fact, there's only like 3 or 4 V3s that I saw on eBay. I got this on Blade Binge. And I think I may have seen one other one. But, this is only a year and a half old or something like that. Maybe not even that. And you don't really see them. So I'm not sure what happened, but this is an excellent knife. And if you can get a V1 or a V2, I will say if there's a big price difference between the two, go with the V1 because the changes are almost imperceptible. The access to the lock bar on the V1 is perfect. I don't know why they decided to change that. It may have just been an aesthetic choice to, put some kind of a change in there, or maybe some along the lines somewhere someone complained about it. I don't have a problem with it at all. And there are knives that I have had a problem with, and I've actually gone in and eased the titanium in those areas and kind of shaped everything. But those are usually spider coves. For some reason, the people in Taichung, Taiwan, they don't care if you have thumbs or not, and you're going to get what you get, and you're going to like it, and you're going to pay a lot for it. But most other knife manufacturers, they realize that people have thumbs, and they're going to give you a way to get in there and deploy their blades. And so this one is like that. You can see in here. This is not a difficult lock bar to access at all, but that is one of the changes they made on the V2. So I'm sure it's even better. But if you can get a V1, get it. And if you can get a V2 for about the same money or whatever, definitely get that because these are excellent knives. They feel fantastic in your hand. The Magna Cut is definitely the way to go. And so that is my Gecko Custom Sikorae V1. And I appreciate you watching. Thanks very much.